Morning world, it's the 20th of May 2019. It's about 9 o'clock in the morning UK time. I'm looking at the aspects between Pluto and Uranus at the moment. The Pluto-Uranus combination is a weird one. In mythology, it's a strange combination because we're talking about grandfather and grandson here. There's not a lot of linkage in the Greek mythology that actually suggests they had that much of a relationship. I'm not aware of any time where, according to the mythology, that they actually met, although I'm sure they must have done in some shape or form. Nevertheless, the archetypes of Uranus and Pluto do share a degree of similarity in that they both deal with compressed and concentrated change. One of them through external action and the other through internal action, which is kind of fitting because Uranus in mythology is the sky god, one of the original triptych and one of the founders of the human race according to the Greek mythology, whereas Pluto is more to do with internal change, which fits because he's the ruler of the underworld, the lord of the underworld, and Pluto deals with the dark stuff, not the negative, but the dark. Now, Uranus and Pluto, the conjunctions and oppositions, and to a certain extent the squares over history, have been incredibly significant. I'm indebted to the astrologer Paulden Jenkins for the research he's done on Uranus-Pluto cycles over the years, over the millennia. And he notes that, for example, in 1201 AD, at the time of the Uranus-Pluto conjunction in Cancer, was when Genghis Khan swept through Europe. In 1648 and 1649, when the Uranus-Pluto opposition was happening, this was the end of the English Civil War and the establishment of a first type of parliamentary democracy in the world. In 1900, the Uranus opposition to 1900, 1901, 1902, the Uranus opposition to both Neptune and Pluto, from Uranus in Sagittarius to Pluto and Neptune in Gemini, was a major development. Such a time of concentrated change, and indeed, astrologers who are interested in the history of the world and over a long period of time would do well to look at 1900. And to an extent 1901, with Jupiter and Saturn and Uranus all together in the same sign of Sagittarius, whilst Neptune and Pluto were in Gemini. Massive time of concentrated and compressed change for the world. Then Uranus and Pluto were conjunct in Virgo over the period of 1964 to 1966. 63 to 67, and that brought about massive social unrest. The youth culture began to really emerge in a way that was that made its voice heard. It wasn't treated as just being rebellious, it made its voice heard, and from there whole new patterns of social orders began to develop. And then, of course, in the last few years we've had the Uranus-Pluto square, with Uranus in Aries demanding greater freedom for individual human rights, with Pluto in Capricorn bringing the ideal of transformation of organisation, whether that's political, economic, corporate, whatever, and the needs of the large group versus the needs of the individual has been a constant area of change over this last few years. But now, in the 21st century, with ever more understanding of astrology, with a new way of seeing astrology that perhaps our ancestors and predecessors didn't really see, or really have the tools to work with, then perhaps it's time for a rethink of these archetypes. Uranus still represents change, whether that's change in terms of drama, disorder, chaos, rugs being pulled from underneath your feet, disruption, disorder, or whether it's change in terms of innovation, novelty, stimulus, with words like freedom, independence and liberty being the key phrase. And Pluto is always going to be the planet of transformation, regeneration, death and rebirth, endings and new beginnings. The combination of the two need not be difficult. It can be Uranus can bring the impetus for major psychological change, both individually and collectively, but it can also bring a sense of being forced into change in a way that's not easy. For example, the Uranus-Pluto square of recent years has forced humanity, at least at the political level, into slowly coming to the inevitable conclusion that old systems of government just don't seem to be working anymore. And yet, because the patriarchs basically are so unwilling to let go of power, or unwilling to try anything new, they're crumbling in on themselves rather than allowing themselves to evolve. So something new is coming out of the mix, based more around a communal and a collective way of self-government, powered mainly by the younger generations, but not exclusively. He says, as in his mid-60s. If you have a Uranus-Pluto aspect in your chart, and the only aspect you can have is you can either have, if you're older than me, if you're in your 70s or 80s, you're going to potentially have the Uranus-Pluto sextile from when Uranus was in Gemini to Pluto in Leo, and this was happening in the 1930s, 1940s. The Uranus-Pluto conjunction in the mid-60s. Then the Uranus-Pluto sextile, which was happening, get it right, around the late 80s, early 90s. And then again, of course, the square of recent years. If you're one of these people, if you're born in this generation, then you are a kind of agent of change. And this doesn't mean that everyone born with these aspects is a change bringer, an anarchist or a rebel. But it does mean that if that aspect is accented by being on the ascendant or the midheaven, or receiving strong aspects from other planets, then yes, you are someone who's more of a futurist rather than a traditionalist. Uranus-Pluto does tend to transform ideas and actions concerning the future. It is not given to tradition, structure, old systems of organisation. Change is an essential. Without change, we get entropy and decay, and then things rot from the inside out, as we're seeing in a number of political institutions worldwide. Uranus-Pluto aspects need change, both externally, in terms of the outside world, the large scale, the big groups, and internally, in terms of the way we've always lived within the ways that we've been supposed to, we've been taught in schools, indoctrinated by our groups, our peers, our communities. And there's nothing wrong with this. But evolution is a necessity. If we don't evolve, we stagnate. And evolution potentially means taking more responsibility for ourselves, living within our own boundaries rather than those pushed on us by others. And perhaps this is something when I'll touch on when I do the next the next video, which will be Pluto aspects to Saturn, and hopefully that will be tomorrow. Catch you later, world. Bye.